That song sounds ridiculous. That was the reaction spreading through parts of the music industry after Queen played the track for the first time. Some people laughed at the title immediately. Others thought the band had completely lost touch with reality. And a few critics quietly started asking the same uncomfortable question. Had Queen finally gone too far? At that point, the band was already surrounded by pressure. Their reputation had become unstable. New music trends were changing the industry fast, and suddenly one of the biggest rock bands in the world no longer felt untouchable, which made this new song even more dangerous, because it didn't sound like the kind of record people expected from Queen. It sounded strange, repetitive, almost childish to some listeners. And the worst part? The more industry insiders heard it, the more convinced some became that the band was making a humiliating mistake in public. But while people around him mocked the song, Freddie Mercury reacted very differently. He didn't sound embarrassed. He sounded excited, like he understood something nobody else had realized yet. And years later, people would look back at that exact song and realize something almost unbelievable. The track they laughed at would eventually become one of the most powerful moments Freddie Mercury ever created on stage. The uncomfortable truth about Queen during that period is that the band no longer felt safe. Not creatively, not culturally, and definitely not in the eyes of the music industry. For years, Queen had operated like giants. Their songs dominated stadiums. Their image felt untouchable. And Freddie Mercury carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed no audience on earth could resist him for long. But slowly, something started changing around them. Music trends evolved fast. Punk and new wave transformed what critics considered serious music. Suddenly, Queen's theatrical style, the exact thing that once made them legendary, became an easy target for journalists who wanted the band to look outdated. And Freddie noticed all of it. That was the dangerous part. Because people often imagine Freddie Mercury as emotionally untouchable, but according to people close to the band, he absorbed criticism more deeply than many realized, especially when it threatened Queen's reputation publicly. Which is why the reaction to this new song became so uncomfortable. The title sounded strange, the sound confused people, and the criticism spread faster than the excitement. Some insiders genuinely believe Queen had just released the kind of song that destroys credibility permanently. But Freddie Mercury kept pushing the track anyway, and soon the entire world would understand why. Be honest. Did Freddie Mercury hear something brilliant inside that song before everyone else? Or did he simply force the world to love it through pure charisma and performance? Because even now, fans still argue about whether the song itself was genius or whether Freddie Mercury transformed it into something legendary. The mockery started faster than Queen expected. Before most people even formed a serious opinion about the music itself, the title already gave critics ammunition. Some radio personalities reportedly laughed at it openly. Music journalists questioned whether Queen had become desperate to sound modern. Others treated the song like proof that the band no longer understood what made them great in the first place. And once the track started spreading publicly, the reactions became even more divided. The sound felt different from what many fans expected from Queen. Electronic textures, repetitive hooks, a rhythm built less around traditional rock aggression and more around collective participation. To some listeners, it sounded innovative. To others, it sounded almost embarrassingly commercial. That tension created a dangerous atmosphere around the release. Because Queen wasn't entering this moment from a position of strength anymore. The band was already carrying criticism from previous creative decisions. Rumors about instability followed them constantly. And now this new song suddenly became symbolic of something bigger than music. To critics, it represented a legendary band losing touch with reality. And the strange part? Freddie Mercury never seemed embarrassed by any of it. While people around the industry mocked the song, Freddie reportedly became more energized by the audience reactions instead of less. Almost like controversy itself convinced him the track was powerful. That confidence confused even people close to the band. Because at that moment, almost nobody fully understood what Freddie was seeing inside the song yet. The deeper Queen moved into rehearsals and performances, the stranger Freddie Mercury's relationship with the song became. Because while critics focused on whether the track sounded serious enough, Freddie focused on something completely different: crowd psychology. That's what made his vision so unusual. He wasn't listening to the song the way journalists listen to it. He wasn't analyzing whether it sounded fashionable or technically respected inside the music industry. Freddie cared about emotional reaction, participation, energy, movement. He cared about what happened when thousands of people experienced the song together at the same time. And slowly, people around him started noticing something unsettling. Freddie wasn't treating the song like an experiment anymore. He was treating it like a weapon. During rehearsals, he reportedly became obsessed with how audiences physically responded to certain moments. The rhythm, the vocal patterns, the repetitive structure critics hated so much suddenly became incredibly important to him, almost like he understood the song could create something larger than music if the audience surrendered to it emotionally. And perhaps the strangest part? The more people mocked the track publicly, the more convinced Freddie seemed to become that they were all underestimating it. Not because the song sounded sophisticated, because it felt massive. And eventually, Freddie Mercury would bring that song into an environment where critics no longer controlled the reaction. An environment where only the crowd mattered. By the time Live Aid arrived, Queen carried pressure into Wembley Stadium that most audiences never fully realized. The band needed a moment, not another decent performance, not another successful tour. A moment powerful enough to completely change how people felt about them again. And somewhere inside Freddie Mercury's mind, that controversial song had become central to the plan. That's what made the atmosphere before Queen's set feel so tense. Backstage, legendary artists moved through Wembley preparing for one of the biggest concerts ever attempted. Producers rushed through corridors. Cameras followed global superstars everywhere. But around Queen, the energy reportedly felt strangely focused, almost aggressive, especially Freddie. People noticed how quiet he became before walking on stage. No wild jokes, no chaotic rock star energy, just concentration. Like he already understood something nobody else in the building fully saw yet. Then Queen finally stepped into the stadium. And within minutes, the emotional atmosphere inside Wembley began changing completely. Because suddenly, that mock song no longer sounded ridiculous. Thousands of people started moving together, clapping together, singing together. The exact repetitive rhythm critics attacked started spreading through the audience like a wave. And backstage, some of the same people who once laughed at the song reportedly stood frozen watching the monitors. Because the track they mocked was no longer just a song anymore. Freddie Mercury had turned it into an experience. The song people mocked so aggressively was called Radio Gaga. And at the time, even the title alone sounded absurd to some critics. For a band like Queen, known for massive rock anthems and dramatic compositions, releasing a song with a name like Radio Gaga felt almost self-destructive in the eyes of certain journalists. Some openly questioned whether the band had become desperate to stay relevant in a changing industry. Others mocked the repetitive lyrics without realizing why Freddie Mercury was so interested in them. Because the song was never designed to impress critics on paper. It was designed to control human reaction. That was Freddie's real obsession. While reviewers focused on how strange the song sounded through headphones, Freddie focused on something much bigger. What happened when thousands of people experienced it together in the same physical space? That's why he became fascinated with the rhythm, the clapping, the repetition, the simplicity. To critics, those things looked weak. To Freddie Mercury, they looked dangerous. And slowly, the song stopped behaving like a normal Queen track. Every live performance made audience reactions bigger, louder, more synchronized. Even people who claimed to dislike the song often found themselves physically participating once the rhythm started. That contradiction fascinated Freddie, because he was beginning to realize something uncomfortable. The critics mocking the song might completely lose control of the audience once Queen played it live on a massive stage. What happened next is the part many critics never saw coming. The song started changing people physically. Not emotionally at first, physically. During performances, audiences began reacting almost automatically to the rhythm of Radio Gaga. Thousands of hands moving together, entire crowds clapping in synchronization without needing instructions. People who had mocked the song earlier suddenly becoming part of the exact experience Freddie Mercury imagined from the beginning. And once Freddie noticed that reaction happening consistently, everything about the way he performed the song changed. He stopped treating it like a controversial track. He started treating it like a stadium ritual. That transformation became especially obvious during live performances leading toward Live Aid. Freddie leaned harder into crowd interaction. The pauses became more calculated. The gestures became larger. He wasn't simply singing anymore. He was conducting emotional participation on a massive scale. And perhaps the strangest part? The more the audience surrendered to the song live, the more outdated the critics suddenly looked. Because the music press kept analyzing the song intellectually while Freddie was testing it biologically in real time on human crowds. And the crowds kept proving him right. By then, even people inside the music industry had started noticing something uncomfortable happening around Queen again. The band everyone claimed was losing relevance somehow seemed bigger every time they stepped onto a stage. And Freddie Mercury was about to prove it in the most dangerous environment possible. Live Aid. By the time Queen arrived at Live Aid, Freddie Mercury already understood exactly what Radio Gaga could do to a crowd. The real question was whether it could work on the biggest audience of his life. Because Wembley wasn't a normal concert environment, it was chaos. Dozens of legendary artists, millions watching worldwide, constant pressure backstage, no room for mistakes. And perhaps most dangerously of all, Queen only had a short set to change the emotional atmosphere of the entire event, which made Freddie's decision even more risky. Out of all the songs Queen could use during those 20 minutes, he chose the very track critics once treated like an embarrassment. And backstage, some people reportedly still doubted it. The song was too repetitive, too strange, too dependent on audience participation. If the crowd rejected it publicly at Live Aid, the humiliation would happen in front of the entire world. But Freddie walked onto that stage looking strangely calm, almost confident. And when Radio Gaga finally began echoing through Wembley Stadium, something extraordinary started happening almost immediately. The crowd didn't resist the song. They surrendered to it. Tens of thousands of people moving together, clapping together, following Freddie Mercury in perfect synchronization as if the entire stadium had suddenly fallen into rhythm with him. And backstage, some of the same people who once mocked the song reportedly stood staring silently at the monitors. Because in that moment, the criticism surrounding Queen collapsed all at once. Freddie Mercury had turned the song they laughed at into one of the most unforgettable moments in rock history. The most humiliating part for the critics wasn't that Radio Gaga succeeded at Live Aid. It was how completely powerless their opinions suddenly looked once the crowd took over. Because the moment tens of thousands of people started clapping together inside Wembley, something strange happened to the entire conversation surrounding Queen. The criticism stopped mattering. All the articles mocking the song suddenly felt disconnected from reality. The people calling the track childish were now watching one of the biggest audiences on earth surrender emotionally to it in real time. And the scale of that reaction made the backlash look almost absurd afterward. That was the moment Freddie Mercury truly won. Not when the crowd cheered. Not when the cameras focused on him. When the emotional reaction became too big for critics to control anymore. Because Freddie understood something many journalists didn't. People rarely remember how music is analyzed. They remember how it makes them feel. And Radio Gaga created something critics completely underestimated: unity, participation, emotional release on a massive scale. Suddenly, the song no longer sounded ironic or strange. It sounded human. Even backstage, the atmosphere reportedly changed around Queen after that performance. Artists and crew members who once viewed the band with uncertainty now watched them differently again, like giants. And Freddie Mercury knew exactly what had just happened. The song wasn't controversial anymore. It was untouchable. Years later, many people still ask the same question. How did a song so heavily mocked at first become one of Queen's most iconic live moments? And the answer is actually much stranger than people realize. Freddie Mercury never really changed the song itself. He changed the way people experienced it. That's the difference. On paper, Radio Gaga still looked unusual compared to classic Queen songs. The repetition was still there, the electronic influences were still there. The lyrics still sounded strange to some listeners reading them for the first time. But Freddie transformed the emotional context around the music completely. At Live Aid, the song stopped being that weird Queen experiment and became associated with something much bigger. thousands of strangers moving together at the exact same moment under Freddie's control. And once audiences emotionally connected that image to the song, everything changed forever. That is why the performance still feels so powerful decades later. People are not only remembering the music, they are remembering the experience Freddie Mercury built around it. The clapping, the energy, the feeling of an entire stadium becoming synchronized emotionally. Critics heard a strange song. Freddie Mercury saw a shared human reaction before it even existed, and that ability separated him from almost everyone else in rock music. Because Freddie wasn't simply performing songs. He was engineering moments people would never forget. Before Radio Gaga, the narrative surrounding Queen had become dangerous. The band was still famous, but the certainty around them had started disappearing. Critics questioned their direction. Parts of the media treated them like survivors from another musical era, struggling to remain culturally important. And then came the song that was supposed to embarrass them even more. Instead, it changed everything. Because once Live Aid happened, the entire emotional narrative around Queen transformed almost overnight. The same song critics mocked became permanently attached to one of the most legendary performances in music history. And suddenly, the band that looked vulnerable before Wembley started feeling enormous again. That reversal mattered more than people understood at the time. Live Aid didn't just give Queen another successful moment. It restored their mythology. And at the center of that transformation stood Freddie Mercury, a man who trusted audience emotion more than media approval. While critics searched for sophistication, Freddie searched for connection. While journalists mocked repetition, Freddie understood participation. And while the industry questioned whether Queen still belonged at the top, Freddie Mercury walked onto the biggest stage in the world and forced everyone to feel something together. That's why the story still fascinates people decades later. Because the song they laughed at didn't just survive. Freddie Mercury turned it into immortality. Looking back now, the strangest part of the entire story is how obvious it feels in hindsight. Of course, Freddie Mercury understood how powerful that song could become. He had spent his entire career studying crowds emotionally, not academically, not critically, emotionally. Freddie instinctively understood something many artists never fully learn. People don't gather in stadiums searching for technical perfection. They gather searching for connection. And that is exactly what critics failed to understand when they mocked Radio Gaga. They listened to the song privately. Freddie imagined it publicly. That difference changed everything. Because while journalists analyzed lyrics and trends, Freddie Mercury was imagining thousands of strangers clapping together under stadium lights. He saw participation before the audience even knew they wanted it. And once Live Aid proved him right in front of millions of people worldwide, the criticism surrounding the song suddenly looked irrelevant compared to the emotional experience it created. That's why the performance still feels larger than normal concert footage decades later. You are not simply watching Queen perform a song. You are watching the exact moment Freddie Mercury proved he understood crowds better than the people judging him. And maybe that's the real reason the story still feels so satisfying all these years later. The critics laugh first, but Freddie Mercury got the last word in front of the entire world. The song they mocked was supposed to embarrass Queen. Instead, it became one of the most unforgettable moments in rock history. And honestly, that may be the most fascinating thing about Freddie Mercury. He didn't always think like critics. He didn't even think like most musicians. He thought emotionally, visually, collectively. He understood how to make thousands of strangers feel connected at the exact same moment. That's what made him dangerous on stage. So now, tell me honestly, did Freddie Mercury truly understand audiences better than the entire music industry? Or did Live Aid simply become the perfect moment for Queen to prove everyone wrong? And if you love untold stories about Freddie Mercury, Queen, legendary performances, and the hidden psychology behind iconic music moments, subscribe to the channel because the next story is even more unbelievable.